Oh, we got comments. Somebody's complimenting your hat, Bill.
Ah, official garb.
Yep, Jonathan
Historical
Winthrop
Society. Yeah.
complimenting. Ron Beard is missing the beans for tonight. I'm sure you're not alone on that one, Ron.
Here, we'll open it with this. How's that?
Oh, that's beautiful. You got hot dogs in there? What is that?
No, they're little crumpled up pieces of bacon. I didn't have a proper chunk of salt pork, and we only made half a batch. So things are a little off. I didn't put as much molasses in as usual because we're trying to cut back on carbs and all that stuff.
It looks pretty good.
But it has a beautiful color, don't you think?
It's very brown.
Yeah, I know. Sam Judd once said to me, oh, beans, don't you put those in the ground?
Exactly. They're just big seeds.
Exactly.
Right, so we're getting some great comments. We have a compliment on your haircut, I think from your mom, Porter. Karen Tilburg says, hi, Porter and Bill. This is Karen, Forest Society of Maine. I look forward to hearing the
Oh, hey, Karen. How you doing?
Yeah. Oh, Story Litchfield wants some of your beans, Bill.
Okay. There'll be some left over, I'm sure.
Oh,
Well,
greetings from Gainesville,
like,
Florida. We got people
just do a
coming
little
in from
Bert
Florida.
and I skit here. Just, a little comedy acts and probably take up the hour.
It's true. Oh, someone, Alex is asking to see Gray. All right, so great. So we know that the chat feature is working. And we know the chat feature is working and people know how to use it. So that's great. We have a couple more people coming on, but we're just going to go ahead and get started this evening and let people join us. So Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. We ready to go?
Yep.
There it is, folks. Baked bean supper. Hello there. I'm Bill Horner, and I'm president of the Mount Desert Island Historical Society. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 11th annual Baked Bean Supper. From its beginnings in 2012, this event has attracted literally hundreds of island people, including a dedicated band of over 15 bean bakers, to the MDI High School cafeteria and theater for a welcome and warm evening of community conversation, history, consumption of marvelous baked bean concoctions, and stories, some actually quite humorous. Perfect night tonight, 18 degrees here in Bar Harbor. It's probably lower where you are, Porter. For the second year, COVID restrictions have made our physical gathering impossible. However, we are resourceful, and this year is special. In fact, very special. Author and New York Times contributor Porter Fox is our guest in a virtual conversation with our executive director, Raney Bench. Porter is an island boy. He grew up here on MDI, where he was part of a pack of high school friends, including my sons, who have remained very close over the past 30 years. Early on, he developed a passion for skiing that has taken him to some of the wildest places and highest mountains in the world. And in the process, he discovered the startling realities of climate change and has become a successful published writer. His latest book, The Last Winter, is an excellent and absolutely necessary read. Porter's perspectives dovetail nicely with Raney's Landscape of Change project that focuses on Mount Desert Island's concerns with the effects of climate change. So join us for this important conversation. I hope you've dusted off your old bean pot, got the wood stove cranking, and fired up a charge of your favorite recipe of New England baked beans.
Thank you, Bill. That's great. And thank you, Porter, and everyone else. As Bill mentioned, I'm Raney Bench. I'm the executive director here for the Historical Society. And the Baked Bean Supper is always such a stimulating event. Normally it's stimulating to your taste buds, unfortunately, not so much this year, but it also stimulates our hearts, our communities, and also our minds with lots of new ideas. And unfortunately, even though we don't get to share a meal together, we are able to share our stimulation of our minds and our curiosity and our interests together. So I'm really excited for that. And we're going to be able to take advantage of this great technology that we have to connect Mount Desert Island with the wider world. I noticed in the chats, all kinds of people coming in from the West Coast and Florida and Arizona. So that's really exciting. It's not something you could have participated in unless we had the Baked Bean Supper virtual. So I guess we have to find the silver linings. So we're going to connect ourselves today from Mount Desert Island to the wider world, and specifically the wider world of winter and how it's changing. And we know it's changing because history is able to show us how it's changing. Climate change is often called an existential crisis. And it's called that because it's literally a threat to humanity's existence. And I'm going to play a slideshow here to show you some images as we talk. And so, but MIT, in addition to that, calls it a danger that unchecked climate change can pose to our ways of life and our place in the natural world. And it's in light of this that the Mount Desert Island Historical Society recognizes that we have a role to play in climate change conversations. We are educators, we are interpreters, and we are members of this community. So we have identified different ways that we want to interact with these conversations. Two of those are that we can support education and understanding of climate change through the use of our historic resources and our collections that we care for. These resources can enhance and expand the data sets that scientists are using to document and understand change over time, specifically related to historic accounts of land use, weather, climate, but also specifically related to species, populations, and movements as well. Second, as I mentioned, we are experts in interpreting and we are educators. And so we can take the wide array of information that's available and out there from all sorts of different sources, from centuries of information, and we can distill that and find ways to communicate it from a variety of different sources for people who, like me and probably many of you, are just trying to make sense of it all. And so here you can see some of the ways that our historic resources, pulling out specifically climate information, can help inform how we see trends today. So this desire on the part of the Historical Society to be part of the larger conversations that are taking place about climate change, and recognizing that these historic resources that we care for offer scientists really valuable information, led us to launch an initiative in 2020 that's called Landscape of Change. This is a partnership with the Skudik Institute, Acadia National Park, the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory, A Climate to Thrive, and College of the Atlantic. The purpose of Landscape of Change is to work with historic records to build longer data sets, looking for centuries of information available about weather, seawater temperature, sea level, species health and diversity, and then comparing that information with modern observations that will then document change over time. Tonight's program is offered as part of a larger part of this series related to Landscape of Change, and we hope to have a number of series throughout the summer to be able to engage with you on this topic as well. So our guest, Porter Fox, as Bill mentioned, grew up here on Mount Desert Island, and this is where he fell in love with winter. So his love of winter took him all around the planet, exploring and playing in some of the most extreme places. But over time, he noticed that the frigid places that he loved were changing. Winter seasons were getting shorter, glaciers were retreating, snow wasn't falling, and ice was melting. His new book, The Last Winter, chronicles these changes, noting the environmental and cultural losses that we face, as well as profiling some of the incredible scientists who are risking their lives to understand how our cold places are changing and then to predict the results of that change. So while Porter's work, and what we'll talk about a lot tonight, really focuses on our northern neighbors, we here on Mount Desert Island are experiencing aspects of a warming winter as well. In 2020, the University of Maine produced a new report called Maine's Climate Future, which details the way that winter here is the fastest changing season. as well as in other parts of the world. So just some information to keep in mind as we make these connections between our past, our present, and our future, our lives here on Mount Desert Island, and those far-flung places around the globe that Porter went to visit and will share with us. We can keep some of this information in mind, that Maine overall has a warming temperature that we can track and see over the past century and more, the way that it's been warming. And here on the coast, it's warming faster than anywhere else in the state, for a total of 3.4 degrees over the last just over a century, which means that we're getting more rain than snow, contrary to what is going to happen on Saturday, theoretically, but generally speaking. And that snowfall overall in the state has decreased by about 17% in the past century. So we can break this down even further to understand that, again, over the past 100 years, we've seen 5 fewer days of ice, 13 fewer days of frost, 10 fewer days of snow, and 12 fewer days of snowmaking, affecting the ski mountains and the recreational areas in our state. And then we can contrast that with 5 more days of thaw, 9 more days of bare ground, 10 more days of mud, and 4 to 12 more days of pest survival. So this means the winter's getting shorter, and it's getting shorter by about 2 weeks and growing on the shoulder seasons. Part of this has an effect, especially along the coast, why we're warming so much faster is in part because the Gulf of Maine is among one of the fastest warming bodies of salt water in the world. And marine heat waves are playing an increasing role in the rate of change here on the coast. 2021 marked the hottest ocean temperatures in the Gulf of Maine ever recorded, and 2022 is predicted to be even warmer. So as a result, we're seeing really big changes in patterns of our fog. New species are moving in and established species are moving out, which is impacting the tradition of small-scale coastal fishing. So we know all of this information in part because humans keep records of what they see, what they do, and what they have access to. And these historic accounts and letters and diaries and logbooks and images and photographs and all sorts of different ways that we keep information are able to inform what's happening around us. So this is a really small slice of a larger picture that's captured through Porter's work. And given that everything is interconnected, the stories and lessons and warnings that we hear from in the last winter can be distilled into a warning for MDI as well. So I'm really excited to welcome Porter Fox to be able to join us this evening. I see that many of you have already started using the chat feature, but as you have questions or comments throughout our evening, you can put your questions in the question and answer or in the chat feature, and I will incorporate them into the conversation that we're having. And then we have some images. I'll just sort of pepper them throughout our conversation as well that Porter provided. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an odd question to start with, but your book closes as the pandemic started to overtake the world. It's sort of chasing you from place to place in some ways, and out of Greenland, certainly. And here we are 2 years later on a virtual baked bean supper because that pandemic is, continuing to plague us and keep us apart. So I'm curious about the parallels that you saw between the way that we're responding to the pandemic and how we might or are responding to climate change. Has there been anything that you've seen in global or governmental or civic responses to the pandemic that give you hope or inform you about how we might be responding to climate change?
Absolutely. And first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody for attending. It's a pretty terrific turnout, and any author likes to see that. Book readings are usually pretty small these days. I think there's a few kind of prominent similarities, and it really is the politicization of the response to the pandemic, or the response to climate change, which is obviously frustrating for everybody on both sides. There has been this throughout all history, from Galileo on, there has been this this urge to kind of refute science when it doesn't fit your global view, when your global perspective, when it doesn't fit your comfort zone, when it doesn't sort of fit with the way that you thought things should go. as in climate change, what we saw was a truly miraculous creation of a vaccine in less than a year for this really lethal and contagious disease. And, I think that got extremely downplayed, possibly because an unpopular president, could really probably take credit for that and probably should. But it was the scientists and the scientific community that took this problem on and really saved the day. I don't know if they saved the world, but like they certainly saved the day and made this a lot easier on us. You see the same thing in climate change where we actually, I should say I'm just the reporter that's the liaison between them and everyone here. I'm not a scientist. The scientists have figured out a lot of what's going on, not everything that's going on in our climate systems, but really the basics. And more than 70 years ago, they knew what was happening with greenhouse gases and this kind of incubating effect that they had. So, the response is, okay, the scientists have done their job. They have the vaccine. It is now available in some parts of the world, unfortunately, not equally available in all parts of the world, but let's just take here in the United States, here it is. But because of politics and misinformation and whatnot, you actually have people turning down the life-saving medication. It's if you think about it in like a different sense, maybe there's a cure for cancer that comes out. Are you going to have the same thing where people are going to say, I have stage 4 cancer, but I don't believe all this hocus pocus, I'm going back to regular old chemo, or regular old radiology, whatever it is. I don't know, maybe. It seems insane to me and people that are getting the vaccine and kind of like believing in the science. And again, it's the same thing in the climate world. They know what needs to be done. They have the technology to shift to renewables. They have the storage technology to bridge this gap. They have, it's not all sitting there ready to push the button and go, but the designs are there. The modeling is there. We know what we have to do. And people are just saying, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't really fit my perspective of how I thought my life was going to go. And to take it one step further, as an author, I actually see it with reactions to my book. I was very lucky that the book was received well and got great reviews, and that was a load off my shoulders. But even in the great reviews, they say, it's a real doomsday book, it's like, it's really dark, and it was actually a big surprise to me at first when I heard people say that, because I have dealt with these facts and figures for so long now. I've been reporting on climate change and ice and snow for almost 12 years. And it's just like, it's just there. It's like, I when you see enough peer-reviewed studies kind of coming together at the same conclusion, it just becomes a fact in my mind. And so I'm so familiar with it and kind of living with it. I'm kind of like, I don't really understand how it is doomsday when it is reality. It is concrete history. It is highly sophisticated modeling and proven, forecasting technique that will really show what's going to happen, because they can hindcast it and simulate exactly what has happened to prove that their models work. And so, with all of that tech and all of that, kind of proof that this works, it's almost like getting like jumped in a dark alley by somebody, with like a knife or something, and just looking at the guy and just being like, this is too dark. I'm not going to deal with this. I'm out of here. Like, I don't really dig this. It's happening. And we have, kind of a virtual guy in an alley with a knife standing there. And the thing is that help is standing right behind us. There's a cop car right behind us. Which way are we going to go? Maybe not a cop car is a good analogy, but you know what I mean. There's hope. So on the hopeful side, science is kicking ass right now, and they are so far ahead of anything that I even expected 10 years ago. I cannot believe that I am seeing in 10 years studies that I reported on my first book about this topic superseded by even more granular information about exactly what's going to happen. And seeing UN reports that you sort of think are like the final word on this thing, and just a few years later it's like, actually we're not really looking at 3 feet of sea level rise, it's going to be 7.5. And that change happened in a decade. So the fact that we're visually seeing any of these changes, which typically take thousands of years to play out, is pretty disturbing. But thankfully, we have figured out a way to mitigate it. We just kind of have to all get on board with that.
Yeah. We have a related question to this one, and that was, how do you think the book may have progressed differently if the pandemic had not happened?
Oh my God, I was supposed to go to Siberia. So I'm a little on the fence about whether that was a good thing or a bad thing that trip got canceled. I was going to Siberia to the permafrost lab there, which was going to be really wild. It was in a northern Siberian city, and we were going to go look at woolly mammoth remains that are kind of being unearthed out of this saber-tooth cats, woolly mammoths. They're all kind of coming out of the permafrost as it thaws. And there are, of course, pirates there that are going out and like digging this stuff up and selling it to rich folks around the world. So at any rate, that trip was canceled because of the pandemic. I sort of felt after Greenland that I had reached the edges of my reporting. And if you go too far, the book can get really weighed down by it. It can be too much information. There's probably already too much information in there. So I'm happy how it turned out, but it was crazy. I mean, we were in the Italian Dolomites in February, and it was the same week that the COVID outbreak happened in the Italian Alps, from China to the Italian Alps. And I believe it was actually Iceland that was next, where I ended up about 3 weeks later. So it was following us around the world, and the only real effect on the book it had was complete and total anxiety of leaving my family in New York City while I was doing this reporting, and then up in the Arctic Circle. And when I got back, and we kind of moved up to our cabin up in the Catskills, I actually just had absolutely nothing going on but like work on the book. There was zero distraction for the first time in my life. So that was a little helpful in the making of the book.
Yeah, nice. So here's sort of the softball question that I was traditionally supposed to open with, which is tell us a little bit about growing up on Mount Desert Island, and what was it about here that sort of sparked that passion and interest for winter? And then we had an audience question that's very similar to that, which do you feel like Acadia National Park had an influence on the development of your conservation ethos?
My mom is on this call, so I actually have to tell the truth here that I had no passion for winter when I moved. I was 3 years old when we moved here. So I'm definitely, from away, don't have the 3 generations there. But we ice skated a ton, we skied a ton. I absolutely hated it. When I was a little kid, I would kick and scream and cry. And I guess it was probably around 10, 11, 12 years old. I write about it in the book. Like, I really started to feel what skiing was all about, like really carving a turn, not just high speed snow plowing through the trees and stuff, but really like laying the edge over and like carving a turn and feeling that just energy accelerate out of that turn. I got obsessed with like learning how to do it better and how to ski faster and harder and turn harder. And it really became this, it really was a passion at that point. It's all, most of my friends and I talked about most of the year. And then we had this little cabin up at Sugarloaf, which my folks paid $500 a year for. It was a real tear down. I mean, there was no running water. There was kind of heat. We had a toaster oven and a sink and an outhouse. And my folks immediately were kind of like, this isn't really the ski vacation we were looking for. And so it was relegated to the kids. And so all through high school, we could go up there mostly to get away from our parents. Sorry, Bill, everybody. But we had a really great time up there and just skied our tails off. We skied so much that I had 2 knee surgeries 3 years ago to repair the hole. I just absolutely grinded in my cartilage skiing moguls on Skidder and Sugarloaf for way too long with terrible form, like really hitting him very hard.
Well, and sort of related to that question is, have you noticed changes, in Maine or specifically on MDI winters from when you were growing up here?
Yeah, I think everybody has, I would guess. I mean, I really remember it's the same thing here in the Catskills. It's anywhere on the coast where you're close to the ocean, which is taking in 90% of this anthropogenic heat that we've created, is really warming a lot faster than inland. So I just remember really, really cold winters, minus 10, minus 15, big snowstorms that stuck around for a while. It's really hard to anecdotally prove climate change. Climate change is measured in centuries, 50 years, 100 years. Anything less than that is weather events that cumulatively kind of become climate evidence. But it's pretty obvious. I mean, I saw in your list that the Gulf of Maine, is listed as one of the fastest warming bodies of water. I was told it was the fastest warming large body of water in the world. And 3.5 degrees is a lot. 3.5 degrees is it's almost as much as the Alps, which have been warming at 3 times the global rate because of how the Gulf Stream comes into them and the orography of the whole range. And what they're seeing in the Alps is, literally mountains falling apart because the permafrost that binds the rock together is melting, closing, villages, highways, whatnot. We don't have that in Maine. It's a little flatter, but the changes are just as seismic, in the ocean, with the groundfish and other kind of ocean ecology that's happening there. And certainly, days of snow on the ground, which is a big measurement that they use. How many days do we have snow on the ground? That's going down, down, and down. When does the ice, when do the lakes freeze over? I still got some buddies on the island that are absolutely loving all the black ice that you've had this year, last year. I remember that we had ice. We had a little skimmer ice boat, or we would borrow an ice boat, and we played a ton of pond hockey, and we really gauged like, when does that start? And when the snow came, which always seemed to be around Christmas or so, maybe a little after, the skating was shot. But it seems like these days, every few winters, like you're just skating all winter long, which is terrific. Or you can't get onto the ice
even until January.
So exactly,
that's changing too.
Yeah. So I do think it's obviously pretty obvious that that's happening.
So this sort of leads into an interesting question from the chat, which is, one of the most distressing qualities about climate change that you talk about is the internal feedback loops. So the secondary effects that flow from an initial change. So there's sort of some questions about do you think that these will serve as a wake-up call for people, these sort of accelerating changes that are coming secondary?
I hope not, because when you cross the tipping point, there's no coming back from that, no matter what we do. So if we take it there and we are looking at tipping points in Greenland, Antarctica, Arctic Canada, and Siberia within the next 10 to 20 years. They're saying 10 years, but I think that's way too specific. It's, again, the climate change is just very hard to gauge in that small of a window. But I'd say 10 to 20. And, you know, just the permafrost alone in Arctic Canada and Siberia, you're looking at 9 million square miles of permafrost that if it thaws, you're talking about billions of tons of greenhouse gases going up into the air. I mean, this is potentially warming the planet more than humans did. And as you can imagine, when the permafrost goes above 32F, like, you can't just stop it. You can't cover 9 million square miles with insulating blankets. And, you know, in Antarctica, they're spreading glass beads that refract the sunlight and solar radiation back up into the sky and trying to save that snowpack. It's that type of geoengineering is kind of a fool's errand, I think. So the idea here is this decade to get everybody on board and hit these Paris Agreement goals, and just avoid the tipping points altogether. You know, tipping points lead to extinction level events. You know, tipping points lead to doomsday that is like, not doomsday like in my book, like real doomsday, which we really just can't go there. You know, I mean, it's so maybe people use the tipping point as a reason to say, everybody wake up, this is what's happening. I have found that people have a really hard time getting their head around that. You know, it's kind of like, wait, what's going to happen? You know, another tipping point I like to talk about is the albedo of snow. It's just kind of a little easier to picture. About a third of the planet is covered with snow and ice in the winter. And that's 30% of the planet with this brilliant white reflective surface that reflects 80% of the solar energy that hits it back into space. It's a reflector. It's like a piece of tinfoil, and it's guarding all of that water and soil, earth, mountains, you know, tundra, whatever, from, you know, absorbing that heat. When it's gone, and it's going very quickly in the Arctic Sea, it's going pretty quickly in North America as well, and obviously over in Europe, then dark soil, dark rock, dark water is exposed. The sunlight hits it in the winter, it absorbs it. That region heats way faster than it ever did. More snow starts to melt, more dark earth and dark water are exposed. And it's just this progression, you know, that kind of eats it up. So those kind of tipping points are we just have to avoid it. Everybody has to get on board immediately and deal with this as the emergency that it is.
So that was, I think, a really interesting part for me reading the book. You encountered these people that you wrote about with great respect and humility, but especially related to some of them that were older people who felt that climate change was a natural cycle, and that what we were seeing and what you were talking about with them through the interviews was a natural ebb and flow that had happened even sometimes over the course of their longer lives, but certainly within the generations of their grandparents. And so they felt like, you know, this was a cycle that humans would survive and continue. It would just be a continued natural cycle that is just part of how the world functions. And so how did you respond to that, the claim that they were making? Did you engage with them about those opinions, or was it just documenting and recording it? You know, how did that feel for you to hear that?
Yeah, I just document and record, you know. I mean, I'm really not an activist. I'm not, this is something I'm passionate about. And I do love winter. We were just out skiing today, and, you know, we're skating here all, you know, before the snow came, but I just listen and record. Everybody is entitled to their opinion. Everybody has a reason, you know, to have that opinion, and I just listen. And the fascinating thing was that one of those old guys, you know, the one that's you might have been talking about was in Europe. And in Europe, first of all, the truth is there are natural climate cycles. There always have been and there always will be. And there is human-caused climate change. And it is possible that they happen at the same time. It's possible that they alternate. It's also possible that they interrelate. But two events, they're not mutually exclusive at all. So the old guy in the Dolomites in Corvara was saying that he has 9-10 generations of his family that have been there. They were there back in the Little Ice Age. They were there in the early 1800s when there was another a cold climate period caused by the shifting ocean current. And so they see the glaciers moving, they see them going back. They see them moving, they see them going back. They have laws there about who is allowed to take ownership of grazing pasture that is revealed by a receding glacier. They also have laws for who has to pay when a glacier knocks over somebody's house. Like, that's how institutionalized it is there. And so he's saying, like, well, sure, it's warm now, and sure, we don't get as much snow as we used to, but like, it's always been like that. And he's right in a way, but he is not right about what is causing it right now or the pace at which it is happening. That is a very specific, very unique crisis that we are in, that we created, and that we can stop. So it's very different from the natural cycles that he witnessed before. But it's hard to convince somebody that saw this exact same thing that's like, oh yeah, but now it's something else that's causing it. It sounds like a hoax,
Yeah, there's a lot of questions coming up in the chat about, how do you talk to people about this? How do you convince them? How do you address denying or climate denying?
It's really hard. To be honest, I go to a couple of websites that literally have the answers to this question, like what you can say to your crazy uncle that doesn't believe in climate change. And one is Protect Our Winters, which is an advocacy group that I've worked with for a long time. They're terrific, and they have that on their page. And another is the Climate Reality Project that actually has, I think they even have a search bar. You can type in the question or type in the denier statement, and then it will come back with like, well, here's actually what's going on. Number one, if you tell them that they're stupid, it's not going to help anything.
Right, never.
That probably just goes for everything in life. But you really have to find common ground. It's the politics in this country are it's politics. I want to say they're so bad, but like that is politics. Like politics pit people against each other in a certain way. Right now, it's so aggressive. And the only way to cross that barrier, cross the denier barrier, cross the vaccination barrier, is to find something in common that you can talk about, something in common that you agree on. Talk about the Patriots, talk about, maybe not right now, but talk about, next season's, Red Sox lineup, or talk about something that's happening in town, and you can find a little common ground there. They have to agree that it really stinks what's happening to, parts of the fishery in the Gulf of Maine. Like, let's forget the cause for a second. Like, this is a real situation. What are we going to do about that? And find that common ground, and then, if possible, offer a bit of information, accurate information about sort of how things are happening. But just being friendly and trying to cross the divide is really the very, very most important part.
Your cousin Sam would like to know.
Hey, Sam.
how you think you can tell these stories like without scaring people or getting people to shut the book halfway through?
Yeah, that's a tough one. In this book, we very purposefully focused on the characters. The science is in there, told mostly by the characters. Occasionally told by me, but we really focused on the characters. Seth Campbell, who is kind of the second hero in the book, who's the director of the Juneau Icefield program, and grew up on the coast of Maine, and teaches at UMO, and has really helped bring, well, first of all, UMO is one of the greatest climate change institutions in the world and has been for 50 years. And their climate program and geology program is just absolutely outstanding. And Seth has brought it for more together with the Juneau Icefield Research Program and really took it into the limelight. It's a really, really highly regarded program right now, where I'd say half of the scientists that are in my book were affiliated with UMO in one way or another. Anyway, telling Seth's story about growing up, about his dad, about how he got interested in this kind of thing, about how the guy never sleeps and he never drinks coffee. It's like, he's sort of this, inhuman character that brings people together and is solving this crisis. So that's what we did in this one. And I think that's probably the best way to get that information across. And if you go too much, people just zone out. I'd say like more than a paragraph or two, and they're like skipping down through the book to get to the next adventure scene. We're very simple creatures, including myself.
I inadvertently offended someone who pointed out in the chat that why did I refer to older people as the climate deniers in the book? And it was not based on age, it was based on length of experience, that they had lived long enough to be able to see these cycles of change that had happened and remember them and be able to attribute them to things that they were before we knew about human caused climate change. And so that's what I meant by a generation that would be able to have a longer look back over time. So I apologize.
And I saw clear. That, yeah. And I did see that in reporting that there was more, they just had more anecdotal evidence to be like, I remember back in the 60s when it was, I can't say that, I was born in 1972, so really the more anecdotal information you have, the more knowledgeable you can be about those natural cycles, except that the human memory is flawed. And there's actually a study I referenced, I think it was in my first book, a snow scientist in Switzerland found that anything beyond 5 years, people were extremely inaccurate in gauging how much snow fell that year. They'd be like, oh yeah, it hit 87. It was like, that was the big deep year. We got 20 feet. And it was like, no, 87 was a total drought. 88, we got like 2 feet. So it is, the memory can play tricks.
Yeah, certainly, which is, I'll just put a plug in for historic resources and records,
yes,
and how
absolutely.
important they are, that are cared for in museums. And we did have a question actually related a little bit to that, which was, skiing here on the island. There was a ski hill on McFarland Hill, a little, I don't think you could call it anything more than a tow rope or a tow chain. And actually we have records in the Historical Society of people going to the National Park Service, I think it was in the 40s or 50s, asking for the hill to be reopened. And we have Park Service data that they sent back that lists the snowfall amounts and how much was in each month over the course of the winters, that show why the ski hill was no longer a viable option here on the island.
Wow, so, that's so interesting. There's around in between 1970 and 1990, I would say, maybe 1960, 1990, there's about 350 ski resorts that closed in New England. And it was primarily due to a lack of snow. The insurance game got into it a bit, where people had to get expensive insurance policies all of a sudden, but most of it was they couldn't afford snowmaking equipment.
We have a comment about increasing data about the impact of the more frequent freeze-thaw cycles and the result of climate change, and how those are damaging archaeological sites, especially coastal sites. And so there they were talking about soil destabilization and increased erosion.
The scientists at the Juneau Icefield Research Project refer to it as the merciless freeze-thaw cycle. That is one of the most destructive forces on Earth. The water gets in, it freezes, it cracks the rock a little bit, and you just see whole mountains like coming apart up in Alaska. It's totally true. It's really a powerful thing.
Yeah, we're worried about that here on the island with historic sites, because traditionally what would have been encased in ice over 5 months is now expanding and contracting and being exposed for many more months than it would have been otherwise. And so we're going to lose those resources here faster too. We have another comment that what doesn't appear to or seem to appear in discussions of the rapidly warming Arctic and land and Arctic Ocean is the contribution of the mega dam reservoir complexes with their accumulation of heat during the summer and release during the winter. The Russians have been doing this over a long period of time with the desire to melt sea ice and warm the land adjacent. There's more facts about that, but
I think it's possible, and certainly could have that effect. A larger effect is there's really two things. It's the albedo and this feedback loop I talked about with more earth and ocean being revealed, absorbing all of that extra heat. That Arctic amplification. I mean, it's 6 degrees warmer up there. You know, you're seeing 3.5 on the coast. It's 6 up in Alaska and Arctic Canada and Greenland. So that is just a huge change. And the warmer it gets, the faster it melts. And it's just kind of this feedback that's really picking up steam. There's also these atmospheric currents where you're seeing more. The additional heat in the planet is supercharging storm systems, supercharging. The ocean's absorbed about 90% of that heat, and that upwelling and those changes in currents are making for these giant thunderstorms in the equator that actually will send hot air up into the stratosphere over and right to the Arctic. So you're getting heat coming up that way. You're getting heat coming up with ocean currents. You're getting this feedback loop. It's really kind of worst case scenario on the poles. I put in the book that so much ice and snow have melted in the poles and North and South Pole in the last 30 years that the rotational axis of the planet has shifted. So the way that the planet wobbles and turns, if you're, say, Martian out in space studying Earth for your school project, you're going to notice that it has changed its rotation. And that is shocking to me. Like what happens there is two things. As the ice caps melt, that mass of ice, extremely heavy, as we all know, melts, turns into water, and flows elsewhere. As the ice shelf shrinks, it actually has a gravitational field which pulls water to it. So there's a lot more water. The sea level is higher right around the ice caps, the poles, than it is elsewhere, and it loses that gravitational pull, and that sends more water elsewhere. So Greenland losing its ice, you see sea level rise in Jakarta. You know, Antarctica losing ice, we actually see it on the northeast coast. We see a rapid, not rapid, but faster sea level rise. So it's weird stuff.
Well, that leads me to a question I had a little bit about modeling. And that is, the last winter you theorized about, warming climate eventually meaning that we no longer have ice and snow on the planet. But there's been, there's lots of other theories. But one of the ones that, we especially here in New England is related to the currents that affect us here in New England and then over in Europe. And that there, with the Greenland ice sheet melting and introducing a lot of fresh water into the currents up here, there's a potential that those currents will shift, which would result in a colder climate for Europe and perhaps launching Europe into a little ice age. So can you talk a little bit about sort of how your research and just the curiosity of the way the different modeling works and sort of how you think about all the different theories that are out there?
And it's conflicting. It's kind of like on our way to getting hot, we're going to see 500 years of ice age in Northern Europe. But that's what happens. That is how complicated this climate system is. We could see a cooling in the Northeast as well, during that time. This Gulf Stream is, it's the largest river on the planet. It is this massive amount of warm water coming up from the equator, sweeping off the East Coast of the US, arcing up towards Greenland, and then sort of meanders off from there. And to be honest, they're not really sure where it goes. That's something I'm working on a project right now, is they're trying to dial in exactly what happens to the Gulf Stream at that point. So we know that this happened before. After the last ice age, 16,000 years ago, Laurentian ice sheet starts to melt, all of the glaciers in Europe are melting, and here we go, grass is coming out, humans are moving north, the forests are starting to regrow, and then all of a sudden something happens that stops the Gulf Stream completely. And you see, I believe it was a 10 or 14 degree drop in temperature, average temperature. Imagine that. We're talking about tenths of a degree here affecting our life. This is a 10 to 15 degree drop. And that happened in the course of 5 years. It was like that. And that sent Europe into this mini ice age, one of many. So it was, like you said, what is happening there is all of the fresh water pouring off of the Greenland ice sheet and land glaciers and down through the Labrador Current to the Gulf of Maine, all of that. That fresh water sits on top. It's not as dense as the salt water, and it creates a block, creates a cold blob, they call it. And it really is like this curtain of water that just stops the Gulf Stream from doing what it wants to do, which is just continue its path. So that will happen. But the reality is, in the long run, the warming wins. That is a planetary thing. That is happening. It will continue to happen. These regional shocks, that same cold blob would likely create a drought over kind of the middle belt of Africa. And that could be devastating to nations there. There's a lot of repercussions that come from that. All of these repercussions, when there's less snow in Siberia, you see a completely different weather system in California on the west coast of the US. These things are all interrelated in a really weird way. And we're still kind of figuring that out, but we do know the big picture. It is getting warmer. It's going to keep getting warmer until we get this CO2 and other greenhouse gases out of the sky.
So that sort of triggered a question that came in about, there's sort of this quote unquote alternate science against mainstream science that's being presented as equal or opposing theories. Can you comment on that or talk about that a little bit?
Oh, of course. I have the folks showing up to my readings with 3-ring binders stacked with hand-drawn graphs and even printouts from places that I wouldn't go for research. Some alternate science is spot on, and some people are researching really incredibly interesting alternate reasons why certain climate events are happening, or how to solve the current climate crisis and whatnot. But logic says go with the 80,000 scientists that have come together to form the IPCC annual report that tells you what pretty much every single scientist and every peer-reviewed climate change paper in the world is saying. Bring it all together, cutting out the extreme views, cutting out the conservative views, kind of hitting it in the middle there. It's similar to, go back to, being a medical doctor. How many people go into a doctor's office and get told that they have cancer and then go home, and instead of taking chemo and the radiology and whatever other cures that are offered to them, just start to make up kind of like concepts and go to Breitbart and go to Newsmax and try to find sure, there's holistic ways to cure cancer, absolutely. But I'm talking outside the realm of kind of these proven scientists and sciences and proven methods into a realm of fantasy. When your own life is at stake, when your child's life is at stake, most people are not going to go down that road. With this existential threat that we can't really see, we're not really programmed to be fearful of something that's not right in front of us. Well, then we can go and we can find another, and I'm not saying all alternate science is this way, but a lot of it is. and a lot of people that have brought it to me, there were no facts there. It was just kind of ideas, and it was a way to reinforce their worldview that humans are not capable of causing change on this grand scale, either for religious reasons or for ego reasons or for whatever it is. When it comes to science, you kind of have to put that stuff aside, do the work, gather the enormous amount of data that they're getting with the ice cores, with soil samples from beneath the ice core, from oceanography, from all of it. And that's our best bet. Who knows if it's right or wrong? I hope it's right. It seems to have been proven over and over and over again that it's pretty accurate.
So there's great information in your book and in that answer, and a bunch of the conversation that we've had tonight related to the scientists that you encounter and that you profile in your book. But the subtitle of the book is The Scientists, Adventurers, Journeymen, and Mavericks Trying to Save the World. So talk about those other categories of people that you profile in the book, the adventurers and journeymen and mavericks. And what do you think, what are they doing to save the planet, and how are their voices contributing?
They're guiding mostly. Most of those guys were guides, the guides that took us on the dog sled trip up through Greenland on the East Coast there. The guide that took us around the Dolomites. I mean, these are guys that are so comfortable on the snow. They're so comfortable with two ice axes going up a vertical sheer ice face. Like, it's incredible. They're just a different breed. They're so comfortable in the cold. When I was at Powder, we did a lot of ski mountaineering, and we'd be up at 19,000 feet, waking up in the morning just like, what are we doing here? Like, it's so cold, you can't breathe. And the guide is outside just making oatmeal, making tea, walking around. It's pitch black. It's like so dark, handing it to us through our tent flap, and those kind of people I really have a ton of respect for. They're naturally gifted, and they are just so comfortable in that kind of cryospheric climate and environment. So there's quite a few of them in the book as well.
So I'm going to shift to sort of our last few questions, and then I'll just throw this out there. Your mom would like you to tell the seal story in Greenland of riding on the dog sled with the baby seal. So maybe we'll let you end with that, but we have a few questions related to sort of hope and silver linings. We've got a lot of, maybe not doomsday, but dire scenarios laid out in your book and in a lot of other places where we hear about climate change, and this call for immediate human reaction and action. So what have you seen in your travels and your conversations that give you the most hope? And what kinds of solutions are you seeing that you feel like are really reasonable and what we should be excited about?
When I started reporting on this, there was less than half of the United States population that was interested in action to stop climate change. Now it's more than 2/3. That gives me great hope. I think we've got numbers on this, and that's what it's going to take. Unfortunately, at this late stage in the game, it is important to recycle. It is important to ride your bike instead of drive the car, but at this late date in the game, it is national and international policy change that's going to save us. And unfortunately, that brings us back to politics and voting and putting climate savvy people in decision-making posts. That's what has to happen. So, that is hopeful to me, that we have those numbers, that people believe this is an important thing. We are becoming one of the more conservative members of the international community, the United States as a whole. Most other countries are way more on board than we are, but we have, the big economy, and us getting there would be really, it's not just a big thing. It's like, it has to happen, or this is going to go south really fast. So, we'll remember this talk in 30 years, some of us anyway, and hopefully we will have course corrected and be moving towards really what is just a sensible future. We're using a medieval technique of combustion to create energy. They've been doing this for thousands of years, burning things to create heat, to create energy. It doesn't have to be like that. We've moved beyond that. Our medicine has moved beyond medieval times. Our energy sector can move beyond medieval times as well. And we can go to renewables, go to EVs and really just let's just stop dealing with this, please. I'm kind of over it, let's just do what we got to do and go on with our lives. I don't think anybody wants to be talking about climate change mitigation in 100 years, 50 years. Well, we'll be talking about it in 50 years for sure.
Yeah. So one of the things that really resonated with me, and there's been a couple comments as well, as a mother, I look at my boys and I think about the world that they're going to be inheriting and the fear that comes into play when I think about freshwater or sea level rise, refugees having to move from so many different of these major cities along the coasts where we're going to see inundation. And I just sometimes struggle to think about what their future is going to look like and to find that hope for them. So you talk a little bit about that with Gray in the book. And so I feel like it's maybe fair game to ask, how does that feel as a parent? And when you look at her, maybe it's the same answer as, what predictions or, gives you hope, but maybe on a more personal level, when you look at your own family, where are you in the fear hope cycle?
It's I don't know, somewhere in the middle. I have to read these studies over and over and over again, and then I talk to the scientists, and the stories they're telling me are just so much worse than what's in the paper, because they can't be alarmist or they lose their funding, and if they're tagged as that, it's big trouble. But when you're sitting on the back of a pickup truck tailgate, they'll tell you what they're really seeing, and it's terrifying. I love winter, but it's not winter that I'm worried about. I'm worried about the political and economic instability that comes with this change. Going back to the pandemic, something that sort of a flaw of humanity that we're just starting to understand is that we became very set in our ways. We sort of became very used to life as it is right now, and assumed that the planet has always been like this, that viruses can always be tamed, that there's snow in the mountains and the ocean is there, and everything is how it is. That's not how it is. It is constantly changing. It has been changing for all time, and right now it is changing so fast. If it were a slow progression and climate change, we're going to see 6 degrees in 6,000 years. We've got time. We could handle that easily. We could drive gasoline cars for a while, and slowly transition. Unfortunately, that's not the future that we're looking at. We're looking at an extremely rapid, very rare event that is starting to take place right now. And when that happens, the economic structure of the world, the political boundaries of the world are not set up for this. And you're seeing it with migration issues already in Europe, with people coming out of the Middle East and Africa and Asia and flooding borders. And, you're seeing it in possibly starting to see it on the southern border of the US as well. You're definitely going to see it in the stock market and in the economy in the next 30 years or so. That's what makes me really worried. The temperature is going to come slowly, but our rigidity and our sort of not laziness, but probably naivete and just assuming that this is how it's always been and always will be is probably going to catch us in the end. And I think we need to open our eyes a little bit and realize that things are changing, and that we are incredibly smart, incredibly ingenuitive people, and we can get there. We can get ahead of it if we get going like yesterday.
So that brings me, I said we were going to end on the hopeful side, but I was actually, this is the thing that I was really curious about. No, it's fine. But I meant my question is that one of the things that really struck me, and it strikes me in more than just reading The Last Winter, is sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect between science and sort of the sense of neutrality and of the facts are the facts and nothing but the facts, versus advocacy, which doesn't necessarily mean lobbying, but it's being a more assertive educator in trying to advance a certain point. And I struggle with that disconnect, and it sounds like maybe you do a little bit as well.
It's hard. Like, I sound like an advocate now. I sound like because I am passionate about it, because I do have a 3.5-year-old in the other room, like waiting for me to put her to bed. But in the reporting and the writing, you can't do that. You gotta what my first editor told me. He said, a good editor's chair, and he had this big, like, lazy boy chair that he sat in. This is out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He said, a good editor's chair leans just a little bit to the left, but you always tell the facts. You always stick with the facts, or nobody's going to believe you. You get it wrong once and you're discredited, and that's just, you're done. So you really do have to stick with the facts and triple, double, quadruple check everything, as does the publisher, as does the copy editor, as does, you just really have to keep it straight and narrow in the book. Outside of that, it's hard not to speak your mind in situations like this.
We did have an appreciation for the perspective you gave in your book about the fact that all human history is very special and very narrow window of geological phenomena, and we're not really tuned for any or ready for anything else. So thank you for that. All right, so I think that was the questions that we had prepared for the most part and from the panel, and we're getting toward the end. Do you want to tell the seal story?
Oh God, the seal story is definitely not ending on a good note. Well, the people we were with in Greenland, these terrific Inuit sled dog drivers, were seal hunters. That's what they did part-time, let's say. It's kind of like a deer hunter. And it's important for them to find seals when they're on a 5-day trip, because they feed the dogs with the blubber. And so they would set these seal traps as we went, which is pretty ingenious. They'd augured 3 holes by hand with a chisel, and they always used one hand. I think they were showing off a little bit with an ice pick. One hand, they would get 1 hole dug, and then 2 more on the sides, and then they'd tie a rope to that ice pick, which had a wooden shaft that actually floated, and they'd shoot it through like a javelin through 1 hole, and reach down in the middle hole and catch it and pull it up through there. And they put it like a net on this, essentially. And it was like a gill net. And then they would just hang it there beneath the 3 holes. The seal is looking for an air hole. It goes up to the air hole. It gets caught in the net. Voila, they have their seal. These are like the cutest things in the entire world. My daughter has many stuffed seals. I love seals. I didn't want to kill a seal, but like, this is their culture. It's what they do. We go on our trip. They set a bunch of these traps. We don't see any seals. I'm sort of like saying, thank God. We're on our way home the last day. This is the day we got the call that Trump had closed the borders to the U.S. and Greenland was kicking out, everybody pretty much. So we make a big shot straight home, and we hit the last seal trap, and there's a seal there, a really cute look like a little harbor seal, like Andre the Seal. You remember that book? And at any rate, so they pull them out. The thing's frozen solid, and they put it on my sled, and they're like, "You're responsible for the seal. Sit on it, and don't let it fall off the sled." And they didn't have any other way of tying it down, I guess. They put it on top of our duffel bags. I got to sit on the seal. They start taking off, and sleds. I don't know if you've been on a dog sled, but I mean, it's like being on a bicycle going over, like the rock, like like granite rocks on the shore. It's just all over the place, bouncing. The seal's going over here, it's going over there. I got my hand on its snout and my other hand on its tail, and it's trying to pull me off with it. It's frozen solid, dead, but we do this for 3-4 hours. I mean, it was exhausting. And I got this very kind of like weird relationship with it by the end. I was like, I'm saving you, little buddy. Oh, it didn't come back. At any rate, we make one last turn close to town, and the seal just torpedoes out of the sled. I dropped it. It hit the ice. It skittered, I don't know, 100 feet, something like that. And the sled dog driver, the sled driver really took it out on me. It was like, oh man, you almost had it, but you let us down. It was sad.
That part didn't make the book.
Yeah,
the last part.
Seal.
Yeah. We have 2 people with their hands raised. I asked them to maybe try to put their last questions in the chat or Q&A, but they haven't. So I'll try to. I've never tried this, to allow to talk. So I'm going to try Wendy and Ron. So we'll see if this works. I think you can, Ron, you need to unmute. Wendy, the same. So if it doesn't work, we'll never know what their questions were.
Yeah, they should be able to talk if they take mute off.
Yeah, I've enabled them to talk. So if Ron or Wendy, if you want to unmute and pop on, you should be able to ask your questions.
Little
Diane, the same if you want to.
I think Wendy's on.
All right. Well, okay. Yeah. So sorry. So thank you very much for your time and your perspective and your continued work in this area. I just, it was really fascinating, and we were starting to get some thank yous coming in, some very informative, very enjoyable. Thank you so much. Bill and Cookie, knowing you for as long and as well as we have, we're so proud of the writer and person you've become. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Good talks. Thank you. Fascinating and enjoyable. So great. I would say that we have this recorded. We will make it available through our YouTube channel and on our website, and we'll send the link so that people who weren't able to attend or want to revisit it will be able to. Do you have another project lined up?
I do. I'm working on it right now. I thought I'd have a little more time off, but yeah, it is all about the ocean. So it's very exciting to get back to that. I can't really talk too much about it, but you'll see it in about 2 years.
Maybe we'll get to have you back.
Absolutely. And thank you for all that you do. Everything starts at the community level, everything. So it's terrific how you've kept the Historical Society on track, and it's pretty awesome to see.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and enjoy your beans and enjoy the snowstorm. Stay safe and take care. Thank you.